Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this is the new 2020 Dell XPS 15 9500. Now I usually get told off by my other YouTube creator friends because every time I review a new Dell XPS 15, I say that I'm switching. I've done it for the last 3 years, to be honest. And then late last year, when I reviewed the MacBook Pro 16, I switched again. And now we've got a brand new XPS. The cliche question is, will I be switching? Well, the answer is maybe. Let me explain. The thing is, there's so many great laptops out there, but I've always come back to the XPS as my go-to everyday work laptop. It offers that perfect balance between portability, power, and, well, for the sake of alliteration, premiumness. But as I say, I've been using the MacBook Pro 16 for the past few months and I love it, I genuinely do. But with the new XPS 15, Dell has fixed, tweaked and upgraded almost everything I hoped they would. However, one thing that takes away a little bit from the sheen of the new XPS 15 is the new XPS 17. Their new flagship laptop with a faster RTX 2060 graphics card, new vapor chamber cooling, and a few bells and whistles that make this seem, well, a little bit less exciting. I will of course review the XPS 17 as soon as I can get my hands on it, so make sure you are subscribed and stay tuned for that. But back to the XPS 15, and as well as new 10th gen Intel processors and faster GTX 1650 Ti graphics, we're actually getting the biggest design overhaul to the XPS lineup in about 4 years. It really does feel like the big brother to the XPS 13. Here's one I made earlier. And the only one I'm missing right now is the 17, but when I get that, I'll do a full XPS lineup comparison. But you can see they've gone with the same 16:10 aspect ratio, the super thin bezels, including getting rid of that chin at the bottom. There's no Dell logo anymore. And the new XPS 15 also adds a much bigger trackpad, a refined keyboard, richer and bassier speakers, USB-C charging finally, and overall a much sleeker chassis, partly as a result of dropping the older USB-A ports in favor of just having 3 Thunderbolt 3 USB-Cs, an SD card reader, and a headphone jack. With these changes though, I think more than ever this feels like the Windows MacBook Pro. However, before we jump into talking about what it's actually like to use and if you should buy it, let's talk about the price. In the US, the XPS 15 starts at just $1,300, which gets you an i5, 8 gigs of RAM and 256 storage, but it misses out on the dedicated graphics card. But if you don't really care about that, then it's actually really good value. But if you want the proper XPS 15 with the graphics card, then in the UK you're going to have to pay at least £1,600, or in the US $1,750, which is quite a lot considering you still get the same 8 gigs of RAM and 256 storage and Full HD screen as the base model. I mean, you can get the Razer Blade 15 with a faster graphics card and double the RAM for similar money. But the one I have here with the 4K screen, the graphics card, 16 gigs of RAM and actually 1 terabyte of storage, although the similar SKU model in the US has 512 storage, it's really annoying. Dell's website is a pain in the arse and there's massive differences between the UK and the US versions, including the fact that you can't actually customize this, you can't change the processor or the RAM, at least not at the moment, on the UK website, whereas you can on the US. Anyway, it'll cost you £2,300 or $2,200. It's a lot of money. If you are Mr. Moneybags though, then in the US at least, you can spec this even higher with an 8-core i7, the 10850H, 64 gigs of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage. What you can do is upgrade it yourself if you prefer. Using a T5 screwdriver to remove the 8 Torx screws, you can see the RAM is easily accessible, as well as the M2 SSD, which is under this heat shield. So you could go for the $1,750 model, which gets the graphics card, then upgrade the RAM and SSD yourself. Sadly though, we no longer get the option of having an OLED screen on the XPS. They introduced it last year, but they seem to have taken it away this year, which is a bit of a shame because I actually did buy the OLED one last year, and I really liked it, even though you had to forego the touchscreen. It was 100 nits less bright than the LCD version, but there was no competition when it came to contrast, and it was more color accurate, so it's a bit of a weird thing that they'd bring it in and then take it away so fast. Perhaps there are issues with the displays. Anyway, putting money to one side for a moment, I've been using this for the past few weeks, and I genuinely love this thing. There's a real wow factor when you first open it up and see that screen. Little things too, like being able to open it with one finger, or the fact it instantly logs me in with Windows Hello Face Unlock. Plus we get that fingerprint reader as well, which you can use for things like banking and online payments. The keyboard has a new feel to it too. Compared to last year, you can see the keycaps and the whole keyboard itself have been widened, so it feels more spacious and comfortable to type on. The keys also have a more rubbery, less plasticky feel to them last year, and it's still one of the quietest keyboards as well, but no less tactile or responsive. It's a great keyboard, and paired with this huge new precision touchpad, again giving us that MacBook Pro vibe, it just feels more modern and refined. It's lovely to use. The speakers are also much better than before, and I'd say that this comes second only to the MacBook Pro 16. It's incredibly punchy, in fact maybe even a little too bassy. Now as for the webcam, well, the good news is it's in a good placement. It's on the top bezel, unlike XPS's from a couple of years ago where it was on the bottom and it would look up your nose. Quality is pretty decent. It's a little bit noisy. It's not the brightest, but of course it all comes down to lighting really. So you can see if I spin around there, it gets a little bit better. But what do you think? And also in terms of audio quality, how is my voice? Because in this crazy world we live in, web chats, video calls, and all that stuff is a lot more important. So hopefully this is giving you an idea of the webcam quality. As for the screen itself, I've got the 4K touch version here, and I love the fact that we now get this 16:10 aspect ratio. I really wish more laptops had this. And while you do get slightly bigger letterboxing when watching videos, everything else is just so much nicer and less claustrophobic to use than a typical 16:9. It really does make a difference. And while I'm sad there's no OLED option, the LCD display is stunning. Brightness peaks at 500 nits, it supports Display HDR 400, and it covers an impressive 100% sRGB, 100% Adobe RGB, and 93% P3 color gamut, so it's definitely above average for color accuracy. Alright, let's talk performance, and to see how much faster the new 2020 XPS 15 is, let's bring in last year's model. These are the specs side by side, so it'll be interesting to see how much faster the 10th Gen i7 is, and if the GTX 1650 Ti is really that much of an upgrade over last year's 1650. The new XPS is nearly 26% faster in Cinebench, 8% faster in Geekbench 5 single-core test, and 19% faster in multi-core. Moving on to the graphics, and again using Geekbench 5, the new XPS is nearly 9% faster in OpenCL, and about 9.5% faster in CUDA. In 3D Mark Time Spy, which tests both the processor and the graphics, we see a huge 35% boost. But how does all this translate into real-world use? Well, jumping into a bit of Call of Duty, playing Warzone, at 1080p on last year's XPS and 1200p on the new 16:10 XPS, with high settings, I averaged 46 and 57 FPS respectively, so an impressive 24% boost. In Rainbow Six Siege, again with high settings, we're looking at 106 versus 113 FPS, so only a 6.5% increase. And finally in Fortnite, we get 72 FPS on last year's model versus 79 on the new one. That's an almost 10% jump. Now unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time for gaming anymore, so more importantly for me is how it handles video editing in Premiere Pro. Just scrubbing through the timeline feels pretty similar on both, but when it comes to export times, a 10-minute H.264 4K video took 5 minutes and 26 seconds on last year's XPS versus 4 minutes and 36 seconds on the new one. That's a fairly substantial 15% faster export time. Although it is worth mentioning that even the newer 1650 Ti doesn't have Nvidia's newer NVENC encoder, so it doesn't benefit as much from their recent driver update that boosts performance with Adobe. However, the XPS 17 with the RTX 2060 will support it. And this is the point in the review, just like every year with the XPS 15, where I have to talk about throttling. For example, in Cinebench, we start out at about 4.3 GHz, then within 30 seconds or so, it's down to as low as 2.8 as it throttles to cool down. And then when I run Cinebench twice in a row, the score drops by 20%. And I measured the processor temperature going above 95 degrees Celsius and even hitting 100. On the outside, using my handy laser thermometer, I recorded nearly 50 degrees in the center of the keyboard. So whether you're using keyboard shortcuts while video editing or have your fingers on the WASD keys when gaming, after 5 or 10 minutes under load, it can get uncomfortably hot. So with that said, I'd love to see a version of the XPS 15 with a new AMD Ryzen 4000 series chip. I think that could be really interesting, but I also can't wait to see how this compares with the XPS 17 with its fancy vapor chamber cooling. But what about battery life? Because presumably to fit in this new form factor, Dell's actually reduced the size of the battery from 97 watt-hours down to 86 watt-hours, which is a bit disappointing, especially as, for example, the MacBook Pro 16 manages to pack in a massive 99.9 watt-hour battery. Despite this though, battery life in my experience is similar to last year's 4K model. 1 hour of YouTube at 50% brightness used 15% of the battery, and with normal use, I'm getting about 6 hours from the 4K XPS 15. As usual though, if battery life is important to you, then save $300 and go for the full HD Plus model. It will get you probably between 10 and 12 hours. So with all that said, should you buy the new XPS 15? Well, as a package, with a fresh new design, taller screen, USB-C charging, better speakers, a more spacious keyboard and a huge trackpad, plus with an average 19% performance boost, the XPS 15 9500 is an incredible laptop and I do highly recommend it. However, it's still let down by overheating and throttling, plus with the price increase, while it's still cheaper than the MacBook Pro 16, it is a lot of money. But if you can afford it, or if you even buy a cheaper one and upgrade the RAM and SSD yourself, you won't be disappointed. And as for the question, which I know you guys have watched all the way through just for me to answer, of whether I'm switching, well, I'm going to be annoying and say I actually don't know yet, because I want to test out the XPS 17, see how much better that is in terms of performance and cooling, and also to see if a 17-inch laptop is still portable enough that I can use it when I'm going on my travels. So I'm going to hold off judgment until then, and also I want to do a proper comparison video with my MacBook Pro 16 and the XPS 15 and also probably the 17 to see which is best. Obviously these are all super expensive, super high-end laptops, and they're all incredible, but you know, if you're going to drop 2 or 3 grand on a laptop, it pays to do some research and test them properly. So again, stay tuned for that and make sure you've subscribed. And also follow me on Instagram at the Tech Chap. There's loads of behind the scenes techie goodness, and I'll catch you next time right here on the Tech Chap.